Okay, this is the Bambergate channel, which looks into the circumstances surrounding the framing of Jeremy Bamber and the issues that the case has in terms of resolving what's happened and finding a way through the circumstances to a successful resolution or whatever. What I talked about in the last couple of episodes is the evidence and the public interest immunity. And both those are what I consider roadblocks in terms of Jeremy winning his freedom. Obviously, I went into detail about the circumstances of what happened inside the farmhouse, what went wrong, the decisions that were made to try and correct those mistakes, how those decisions rolled into more problems, how those decisions again were resolved, and how those resolutions created more problems. At every single point, as I'm trying now to paint the picture, the situation over 35 years is just growing. You know, like everything, you know, what do they say? A stitch in time saves nine. You know, you don't solve something early and fix it. You know, you have ever increasing problems, and that's really a good summary of Bambergate. You know, is the 35 years of a cover-up, ultimately not a sustainable solution to the problem, and obviously at some point that is starting to unravel. Over the last, and I've been involved in it for 10 years, that's why I said at the start, I've seen changes over that years. You know, you get more context now from writers and producers, and there's more documentaries and dramatizations. You know, there's more interest in the case now than there was 10 years ago, and ultimately interest provides risk to the case that the general public find the true narrative opposed to the official narrative. So as I said, I talked about the roadblocks in the case. Now there are a few. One of the other ones I'd like to talk in detail about is the aspects of the coroner. Now, coroners do a relatively simple job. Sometimes it's complex to get to do that job, but the objective of a coroner is relatively simple. And I'm going to talk you through the coroner, what happened, and obviously you could, you know, look at the things and check the sort of details yourself. Coroners, as I said, do a relatively simple job, and the first job a coroner does is to establish whether, when somebody dies, is whether they die from natural causes or non-natural causes. Obviously, if they die from natural causes, it's important to know why they died, but you know, that's not a crime. You know, it's, you know, when somebody dies of non-natural causes, you either have manslaughter or murder. Maybe there's another something in there, but you know, usually in society, you know, it's a crime. In the case of the victims, in this case, everybody received gunshot wounds to the head. So even if you are not medically minded, or you know, you've not looked, I think most people would be pretty easy in establishing the first thing, that everybody died of non-natural causes. Okay? Once you've done that, you get then to the second job of a coroner. Now obviously if it's non-natural causes, it's a murder, then you know, that's a crime in society. So the police want to know who committed the crime, and the way they do that is frequently with the assistance of the coroner, and that leads you to the second job of a coroner. And that again is like the first one, relatively simple, you know, and that is time of death. Now, if you have somebody, let's say, who is found at the bottom of a staircase and they've got a head injury, that could be an accident, or if you then subsequently find out that there's maybe a hammer in the shed with their blood on it, and they have a wound the same shape of a head, same shape of the hammer in the back of their head, and there's splattering at the top of the staircase, then you would say, yeah, okay, this doesn't look like an accident, it looks like, you know, foul play. And in that situation, let's say there were two people that visited the individual that's deceased, one in the morning, you know, before they went to work, and they have access to, let's say, showers at work, and then the individual that found the victim at, let's say, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, let's say, I don't know, call them the new boyfriend, or whatever the circumstances are. In that situation, the police would say to the coroner, you know, we know who visited the person on the day that they were found. That's not difficult to work out. Both people are being cooperative with that and being open with us. We just need to know from you, did the person die in the morning or in the afternoon? Now, after somebody dies, that's actually relatively easy to find out. When it's many weeks or months, and you have decomposition, that's not so easy. But in the first few hours, obviously a body cools down, depending on its ambient surroundings. And then from that, you have things like rigor mortis, the stiffening of the body, and livor mortis and things like that, the settling of the blood and stuff like that. So the second job of a coroner is to give a time of death. Now obviously, as I said to you in Jeremy's case, everybody got gunshot wounds to the head, so the first job is relatively easy, not natural death. And then the second job, which is time of death. Now, what we know, and this is well documented, that Essex police stated that Shelia was responsible in the first 5 weeks. That's what they told the newspapers, that's what they told everybody, and that was their official narrative. Now obviously, if Shelia had died first, it would be impossible for them ever to make that conclusion. So what we know is that Essex police were furnished with times of death for everybody, and Sheila's time of death was the last to die, and that's how you're able to state very clearly that Shelia was responsible. Now, of course, that's not a problem if you want to use the narrative as they did in the first 5 weeks, Essex police. But once you change the direction of investigation, if you have a time of death for Shelia, that is when Jeremy is outside the farmhouse with a number of police officers, the time of death is a problem, because what it does is it gives Jeremy a rock solid alibi or method to challenge his conviction. So the coroner's report clearly stated when Shelia died, but unfortunately, if you were to show the coroner's report now, it would also show when Shelia died, but that would have the knock-on effect of allowing Jeremy to challenge his conviction, which means challenging his conviction, then more questions are asked. What did happen? This is a serious conviction in the history, as I explained to you, the Bamber pyramid of who exactly Jeremy is within the justice system and things like that. It's not, Jeremy's not a shoplifter, it have serious implications. People ask serious questions about covering up of the evidence. So the time of death and the coroner's role is actually fairly critical. Now, I think the official is the report has been lost. As I talked to you about the other evidence and things like that, once you understand what happened in the farmhouse, you can then understand what you're told about the evidence, and you can understand how that fits in to what actually happened. So obviously, the coroner, if the coroner knew, like let's say Shelia died at 7:45, just after the police officers entered the farmhouse, and Jeremy had been outside for 3-4 hours, it should be relatively easy to get an accurate time of death. If everybody else is suffering rigor mortis and liver mortis in the house, and Shelia isn't, which of course, there are pictures of Shelia, and other coroners have looked at those pictures, and other coroners have stated from those pictures what they think the time of death are, and obviously they are consistent with when Jeremy was outside the farmhouse. But obviously you can see what I'm saying is that it would have been very, very difficult to have achieved a conviction of Jeremy without the cooperation of the coroner. Now, of course, if the coroner's not called at the trial and the coroner's not asked the right sort of questions, is it the responsibility of the coroner to speak up? Well, potentially not. I mean, maybe you have your own opinions on things like that. But what's more important, or what's a part of what you need to understand, is exactly who the coroner is. Now, I always get his name wrong, I struggle to pronounce it. There's a guy called Peter Van Ziesis. And he's quite a famous coroner, and I'm actually looking at his website here, and it goes down onto from his homepage, research interests, and it comes to a point where it says high profile cases. And it says, below are a few recent examples of recent cases I have been involved in, not me, him. And the first on the top line there is, it says, I was invited to investigate the circumstances surrounding the death of Princess Diana. So, what I'm getting at, the point that I'm trying to take, the issue of the roadblock is, the normal job of a coroner is natural or non-natural death, and then second to that is time of death. And obviously time of death gives Jeremy a rock-solid alibi and means that the coroner would have said, well, clearly this guy couldn't have been responsible because Shelia died when Jeremy was outside. So if you establish that chain of evidence, the question is, why didn't the coroner speak up? Why was that coroner used? And is the coroner somebody who cooperates in these circumstances? So obviously that then leads you to the question maybe of asking, well, did he cooperate in the investigation into the circumstances surrounding the death of Princess Diana? And obviously there is an awful lot of conjecture online about those circumstances. So the point that I'm trying to make is, this is another one of those roadblocks that is utterly detached away from Jeremy's campaign to win his freedom. But in my view is one of the problems associated, like the destruction of the evidence, like the public interest immunity that leads a paper trail up to the Home Secretary, keep this a secret away from the people. You know, these are issues that surround the case that in my view would stop Jeremy ever winning his freedom by the normal terms. Hence the reason why I'm making this series, to explain these points and to try and navigate a way around this and to create a scenario where maybe the government cannot negotiate by keeping things a secret. So the coroner is a critical roadblock. Obviously, as I pointed out with the bullet evidence, at the time of trial, there were the two bullets that were found in Shelia were described as whole bullets, and you can actually find online, it's quite easy, in fact it might even be on the website, you can find the x-ray of Sheila's neck where you can see clearly the bullets were not whole, they fragmented in her neck when she shot the pellet there. And you can also see, you know, there's some pictures online where there's pictures taken of the bullets that were removed by Peter from the bodies. And obviously, as I explained, these were also destroyed. And they always have the weights and then PV, which is Peter's initials, and obviously a picture of the bullet. So, you know, the pellet would have been impossible to present at trial and would have run the risk of somebody discovering that more than one gun had been used and being able to challenge the prosecution's argument about what happened in the farmhouse. So the coroner, in my view, is one of the roadblocks. Incidentally, I actually had a look at some of the other cases he had been involved in, and I sometimes, I know it's very difficult to use this word, but I sort of describe him as a coroner of convenience. If you have some tricky circumstances around a case, maybe you need a coroner of convenience that can shape things the way you want. As I understand with Jeremy's case, I think, as I understand what happened, I think you have to read into the words of what I'm saying there, so you know, I can't say what I want to say, but I think I'm hinting at it. What I understand is when the officers went to the coroner's office and they had a discussion, and one of the officers, called Stan Jones, made a little challenge to, is this everything? Obviously, the coroner, if he's removing 2.2 rounds from the bodies and he's removing pellet rounds from the bodies, the coroner's immediately going to know that more than one gun has been used. And if the coroner feels that in his report, the decision to make it a one gun crime event or narrative is already running into problems. So in those circumstances, the officers would have needed to go to the coroner's office and say, look, this is what you're going to find when you do your investigation. This is what you're probably going to write on your investigation, and this is what's already been decided. This is what happened inside the farmhouse. This is what has been decided. It's been decided to present it as 2 shots to the head, a misfiring by a semi-automatic weapon, 1 gun being used, and we don't particularly want it advertised that Shelia also shot herself with a different weapon in a different room, and we don't want all the questions associated with that. So I think at that stage, it's reasonable to think that maybe the coroner said, well, does that materially change the circumstances of the case? No, it's the same thing. Sheila shot everybody and then she shot herself. Whether the police decide to tell the extra bit, it makes no difference to the coroner. So the coroner might have been inclined to oblige the request and say, okay, I'll just state bullet or projectile or something like that. And maybe I won't take pictures, or I'll separate the pictures from the other pictures and you know, keep that evidence separate. Of course, you know, problems would appear to arise that you've taken an X-ray of a fragmented bullet, and then obviously those fragments would have a weight, and those weights would reflect either a pellet weight or a 2-2 round weight, which might allow somebody to find inconsistencies. And as I was just beginning to say there, I did actually have a look at other cases that Peter had been the coroner on, and there were some other interesting stories, which I don't really want to go into here, but similar situations, can I say. So I regard as the case having a number of these roadblocks, and the situation around the coroner at the time of death is, in my view, a real clear problem. If you show Jeremy's innocent, the question is coroner and time of death, and the coroner's then involvement in a very, very famous investigation. People might then start to make a connection and say, well, hang on a minute here, it might have other problems. And interestingly, you know, Jeremy's father is actually, there's a video of Jeremy's father online, and he's walking across Buckingham Palace with I think it's the birth certificate of Harry, and he hangs it on the thing. And Jeremy's father, real father, birth father, because Jeremy was adopted, actually worked for the Queen. And there's obviously this video online. So of course, if you know, when I talk about the roadblocks, I say, you know, the destruction of the evidence is a problem long-term for the police and the justice system. The government is pulled into this because they signed away the public interest immunity. And the coroner, because of the way time of death and the job of a coroner works, then you potentially could pull a part of the royal family's history into the case of the framing of Jeremy Bamber. So I know that's far-reaching, but I want people to understand the potential implications of what this case means. And as I've said before, I'm going to try and use your knowledge of other cases, you know, like Stephen Avery, you know, an amazing story, but there wasn't a royal link with Stephen Avery's case. There wasn't a link to the government covering up critical evidence and a paper trail to doing that. So you know, there was, I think, evidence manipulation in Stephen Avery's case. So, you know, there was that. So I'm going to go on and make another episode about other things, but that's one of the critical roadblocks that I think stops Jeremy ever winning his freedom from around the case. As I go on, you know, what I'm trying to do is build up your knowledge of the case, and hopefully you're beginning to sort of have a deeper understanding of what the issues are with the case, and then hopefully you're beginning to think about, how do you solve a problem like this? I mean, you know, to defend the police, you know, the police on the day didn't do anything wrong. They made a set of decisions that were based on, okay, mistakes and errors, but anybody could have made those mistakes. It was a very high-stress situation. They wanted to get to the family. Maybe they should have checked the bodies and they should have followed their training, or maybe their training didn't include that, or whatever. But this was not an everyday's work to go into a room where, you know, there were kids, people, lots of people shot in the head. You know, this was not an ordinary day for those firearms officers. They made a mistake, and they chose to deal with that mistake in a way that they chose to deal with that mistake. And I wouldn't actually make a criticism of that. I think it's completely understandable. But hopefully now you're beginning to understand all of the sort of waterfall effects, the ripple effects that those initial decisions have had over the following 35 years. How, you know, other people have been implicated and now pulled into this situation. And as I go through the series, I will begin to talk about potentially some of the solutions and explain, or hopefully it becomes a little bit clearer, why I'm making this series. And, you know, I mean, I can sort of explain it briefly now. You know, it's almost like a poker game or a chess game. That what I'm trying to do is put the government in a difficult position. It's like, as long as you can keep this secret, you can, you know, apply the public interest immunity and nobody ever knows. But like the public interest immunity with the guy that was murdered with the radiation, there are some circumstances where you're not going to keep it a secret. And when you can't keep it a secret, then you have the situation where you can simply cross your arms and pretend it's not happening, which you lose the confidence of the people, which stops you policing effectively. So I think in Jeremy's case, there's no way that this can ever be resolved in the normal appeal courts process. I think the only true way forward in this case is almost to shame the government into making a different decision. So, as an example, you had Hillsborough. Many years of the government just saying, no, we've given you the edited, you know, police notes, you know, you never got to saw the original handwritten documentation. Obviously, over many, many years, the problem didn't go away. The families didn't stop campaigning, and that caused friction in the ability for the police to do their job. It lowered the trust level. So in Jeremy's case, as long as you can keep the narrative of Jeremy's had all the opportunities in the world to challenge his conviction, he's been unsuccessful of that, it's not our fault. If you can get people to understand what really the case is about, then people can understand this guy's never had a fair chance from the very start. He's never really fully understood why he's been framed, and he's certainly not been able to ever fight his conviction and won't be. Then you start to move to almost a challenge by media, and you say, okay, if you can't negotiate and give Jeremy the opportunity in the courts, then you force the people to say, okay, let's ridicule you. Let's show you what you're trying to cover up. Let's show the people what the problems are with the case. You know, like in Jimmy Savile, people can say, well, we've got, you know, the official narrative, there's nothing to investigate here. And then we've got all these witnesses, all these people from all over the country that have never met each other, all telling a very, very similar story about the same guy. Now, of course, this is when common sense comes in. People say, well, what's the chances of everybody making the same allegation with detail against the same guy and they've never met each other? Well, obviously, you know, the population said, well, virtually none, so they've got to be telling the truth. And without any evidence, you know, because there was never any evidence against Jimmy Savile, everybody still understands exactly who's telling the truth. And I feel that's kind of where I think Jeremy's case will go. I think is once you get the narrative out there of what actually happened and what's being covered up and what the implications are, most people because of Hillsborough, because of they've seen the police cover up, because they understand a bit more of the world, and all they need to be told is what actually happened, then people can say, well, yeah, we see a consistent story of evidence destruction, you know, and you almost put Essex police into like a how can I say, like a checkmate. You say, okay, you've got the funnel problem. This is the allegation that's out there against you. And obviously, if you're talking about a private individual, then obviously, you know, we all know innocent until proven guilty. But with a police force, it doesn't work that way. Obviously, with a police force, they take the taxes of the people, and it is their job to effectively police that they always maintain the trust and the confidence of the people. If people aren't cooperating, the whole process starts to break down. So the police are in this situation. Well, the only way we can show that we didn't frame Jeremy is to release the original handwritten documentation. We can't do that because that shows that we have framed Jeremy Bamber. So hopefully it causes a problem for Essex Police, the justice system, and yeah, maybe the government as well, and other people who might also be affected by that outcome. But hopefully they make the same decision that they made with Hillsborough, that somebody somewhere in government or the justice system says, well, look, there are so many aspects with this case. Jeremy is such a high-profile prisoner. We're on a road to nowhere here. You know, once somebody can find out what happened, then our ability, you know, to front it out, to just simply say, we're not going to cooperate, you know, is seriously, you know, challenged. One of I mean, I've gone through this. I can tell you there's loads of things that I've done over the 10 years, and there's some really interesting stories that I'd love to expand upon, and you know, various things that I did and where they led, you know. But one of the things that I did is, you know, I actually made a challenge to Essex Police once, you know, to see, you know, Jeremy had said, yeah, you know, they're really uncooperative and, you know, this sort of thing. But I thought, okay, let's see where you go. So I think I can't even remember what I did. I did a freedom of information request, and then I wasn't happy, so I referred it to who's the guy that oversees, you know, the Police and Crime Commissioner or something like that oversees Essex Police, and I made a complaint to him and, you know, forced him to readdress it, and then I went to appeals and things like that. And anyway, it's a whole long story. You know, I've made complaints to Essex Police. As I say, I've done loads of freedom of information cases, you know, over the years. But it was really interesting because at the end of this, I think it was a 6-month or 8-month process that I went through with them, it came to a point where they issued, and I have to use the right word here, they issued something called a position statement. You know, Essex position on Jeremy Bamber. And it was basically, you know, we don't have anything to say. In other words, this is really the fundamental problem that they're facing. They are unable to engage in any real meaningful response, because the moment that you ask them, did you frame Jeremy Bamber? You know, what can you say? No. We say, okay, then you'll be happy to provide us with, you know, the original handwritten, you know, police notes, or you'll be happy to provide us with the video recordings that were taken, you know, of the inside of the farmhouse, or, you know, you'll be happy to provide us with all of the pictures from the crime scene. Which, of course, no, you'll be happy to provide us with the, you know, the evidence that's held under public interest immunity if you've got nothing to hide. And this is really where they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. What do you do? I mean, it's not really in the hands of Essex Police anymore, because, as I understand, public interest immunity actually forbids Essex Police to reveal that information. But, you know, if I talk about the justice system, you know, the whole process, you know, the government, how do you resolve this situation? How do you come up with a